My name is James Barron, this is my colleague Craig Vincent, and we're here to talk to you about the school staff support school support staff negotiating board. And I always think the main thing I want to do with these sessions is I think we agreed now what we're going to call the acronym SSSNB, because if we're trying to say snubber, it doesn't really have the same sort of. And I heard some people call it SSSNB, and I said, no, that's too difficult. So SSSNB is what we're going to refer to it as. One thing I'd say is we've had this in the diary for a while now, and one of the things I would say is we're going to talk a bit about the impact. What you'll probably be aware of, we had a consultation on this. We hoped by the time we were talking now we'd have a response to that consultation, so there'd be a bit more concrete information, but there's not yet a response. So there's going to be a bit of conjecture, a bit of guessing in our part, but we're going to talk to you a bit about some of the stuff, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. If anyone has any questions while we're going through, please feel free to ask, but we will have plenty of time to have any questions that we want to talk through at the end. So, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about what is the SSSNB and why is it being reinstated, who it applies to and who it doesn't, what it means for your school or trust, including academies, implications for HR contracts and pay structures, what you can do now to prepare, and how this could impact your people strategy. So, SSSNB, it's been introduced by the Employment Rights Bill. So this is where it's coming to force. And it's worth keeping that in mind because you might have seen, particularly in the school sector, there's a few things coming under the Children's and Wellbeing Act, but this is a part of the Employment Rights Bill. And the reason that's important is the Children and Wellbeing Act seems to be going through relatively smoothly through the House of Lords. That is not the case with the Employment Rights Bill. You might have seen that the common phrase that people have been using is ping pong. It's going back and forth. Why every lawyer describes it as ping pong? We're not using badminton. I think we should use paddle. I feel like that's the sort of modern equivalent, like a bit more up-to-date table tennis, but ping-ponging back between the House of Lords. Been back and forth now about 6-7 times. My kids will love me for that, so like, there we have you. I managed to get that in. But yeah, it's been back and forth quite a few times now between the House of Lords and Commons. And we're still looking at when is it going to be introduced. So one of the key things that I would say is the government introduced a timeline for the Employment Rights Bill about when things are going to be introduced. And I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail on the Employment Rights Bill because there are other sessions about the Employment Rights Bill later, and it's a former colleague of mine and she'll kill me if I step on her toes, so I won't go into too much of that. But one of the things to keep in mind with the SSSNB with the Employment Rights Bill is there was a proposed timeline introduced where they were talking about bringing some stuff in April 2026, October 2026 and 2027. The SSSNB wasn't included in that timeline, but in the consultation document, it suggested it was going to be in place for the 27-2028 academic year. Now, what I would say is due to when the timeline was produced and that consultation document was produced, I don't think anyone anticipated the back and forth that we've seen between the House of Lords and the House of Commons on this, and the fact the Employment Rights Bill still isn't passed. So 27-28, in my view, might be now optimistic. We might be looking at 28-29. So this might be very much further along in the future before we see this come into force. It's going to be impacted beforehand, but that's just one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about how this is going to be impacted. So, for people who've been doing this for a while, you might remember we used to have the SSSNB. This was scrapped in 2010 by the coalition government, but until then, we had the SSSNB. And the purpose of the SSSNB is to cover terms and conditions for all support staff working in schools to move towards a synchronised package of terms and conditions across the country. The basic idea is that STPCD with teachers is basically to look at doing that for support staff and to try and have that sort of joined up approach so terms and conditions are similar across the board. One thing I wanted to talk about as well, which is sort of an aside from this but is perhaps relevant, is one of the lesser sort of publicised bits of the Employment Rights Bill that I'm not sure people are aware of is, and this fits into the similar tract with the SSSNB, is there is a proposal to reintroduce what's known as the two-tier workforce code. And what that means is if you two-peat any members of staff out, so catering, cleaning are the most common ones, the people who carry out those services have to be on the same terms and conditions as those that are employed. So what it means is anyone carrying out your catering, cleaning will need to be on the same terms and conditions as those employed directly by your school or trust. So what you can see across the board is the reason this links here is you can see there's this there's this pattern across the board of saying anyone who's working in these sectors should all have the same terms and conditions, and that's the rationale behind it. So you can see there's this joined up approach on it. And to go for this quote, support staff make over half the workforce in our schools with grants a whole of our brilliant teaching assistants, catering staff, caretakers and minimal vital roles. So that's kind of the rationale why we're saying this can happen. Now, who does it apply to? So the test there is a non-teacher support staff member employed by a maintained school or academy in England and working at one or more of those schools. Now the big question we initially had with the SSSNB, particularly for Academy Trust, was what does that mean for central staff? Because if you're not working in a school, does that apply to you? Now the definition hasn't been changed, but the consultation document makes it clear that central support staff would be covered. So we think it will be covered, but certainly as we are at the moment, it doesn't state that anywhere. There's still a bit of ambiguity in the information we have. And one of the things we will come to later is we're expecting a few more consultations on this. So we are expecting more information to talk about this and further information. I don't know why we've had this convoluted application. To me, the easiest way of saying it is anyone who's eligible for LGPS membership is a support member of staff. That to me feels like an easy way of doing this, but I'm not a legislator, so I can't say. But that is broadly what we're looking at. One of the things they did ask in the consultation is whether or not this would apply to agency staff as well. So certainly at the moment as it's drafted, it won't apply to agency staff, but that was one of the questions that was asked in the consultation that we're going to look at. So, what does it mean for schools, academies and trusts? And I've got to say, one of my colleagues prepared these slides for me, and I was like, what does this say? And then I realised I was reading it the wrong way. So it's supposed to say bridge, so don't make the same mistake I did. It says bridge to help you remember. So, Craig's going to talk a bit about this from sort of a HR perspective, but what we're looking at is benchmark current practice, so what are you currently doing, what do you do, review HR policies, identify contracts needing amendment, discuss with stakeholders, get ready for pay and budget impact, and engage with the process. When consultations come out, engage with them. Now, there's two additional things I wanted to talk about before I pass over to Craig. One of the things I want to talk about is firstly, you've probably seen, particularly with school teachers' pay and conditions document applying to everyone, the phrase, this is a floor, not a ceiling. They've used that phrase a lot. That same phrase has not been used here. So what that potentially means is some people might go up, some people might go down. I can't imagine politically it's going to be very popular if it goes down, but that ultimately, that same commitment has not been made, that same phrase has not been used, so we'll wait and see. The other big thing, and I was thinking about this because as a lawyer I feel like my job is to scare everyone, that's kind of what we're supposed to do, so I was like, let me give you something to worry about at least, so you can come out of this and go, oh, we need to do something. The advantage I think of the SSSNB is it will protect you in the future from equal pay claims. So I think in the future what you're going to have is, because you have these standard pay and conditions document, it should protect you from equal pay claims because it's essentially mandated, it'll be agreed with the unions, and you're not going to have any issues. And I think that's helpful because you've probably seen lots of in the news, particularly like Birmingham, Sheffield, all these local authorities have had these massive equal pay claims, a lot of the time as a result of teaching staff as well, and they're basically having to pay out these huge sums of money. And so I think there's a big risk. I think in the academy sector, I think the unions have been more focused on the local authorities first, but eventually they'll probably come for academy trusts. Now my concern is, and this is where I want to scale all of those a bit, is my concern is that if the SSSNB is going to stop this, basically when the SSSNB comes into force, this isn't going to be an issue anymore. So I think there's a real risk that some of the unions may try and use this as a rallying call for their sort of support members of staff to try and build them up and say, we're going to target certain trusts for equal pay claims before this gets resolved. So let's try and bring these equal pay claims in. So this is just me speculating at this stage, but I could absolutely see that being the case. So it's one of those things where it might just be worth thinking about from an equal pay perspective, doing job evaluation, those sorts of things in the meantime to just prepare yourself, because I could absolutely see that being on the radar in the future. Now I'm going to pass over now to Craig, who's going to give you sort of a bit more practical information.
Thank you very much. So I'm a HR professional, I lead our HR consultancy team. So I'm here to help people, not scare people, I'm sure you're pleased to hear. So yeah, we've been trying to think, again, we thought this time we'd have more information, but thinking about some of the practical and some of the implications for you as people leaders in your organisations related to the SSSNB. So using the bridge analogy, which took me a few days to come up with, so that was criticised, but thinking about that, it's what can we do now, and appreciate some of this might not be your first job on Monday morning, but the type of activities we can do now to think about that bridge and think about moving from where we are now to a position where the typical SMB will be in place in maybe 2 or 3 years' time. So first of all, we thought about reviewing existing support staff contracts, looking at your current pay structures. Is anybody in the room not on an NJC pay structure for support staff?
We've got an issue because actually where we've kind of taken on new schools, some are,
of course,
some aren't.
free schools.
And I've got the harmonisation process
Yeah.
because I wasn't sure how quickly this is coming. I think I spend 6 months doing a piece of work
Yeah.
and for it to be presented by the SNB
Yeah, so
anyway.
I think that there's certainly some planning and some auditing to do in relation to that. And obviously with the NJC as well, we have the Green Book pay scales, but we also have local variations as well. So again, I appreciate some of that may be outside of your control, but they will be affected. And as James said, there could be a people going up model, there could be a people going down model. Obviously people going up is great, but funding is the issue. People going down, excuse me, is obviously a process that may have to be managed and something you'll be directed to manage. So again, it's a bit of guesswork, but we think in terms of the B and things about your current practice now, or the next few months are a good time to really look at where you are, look at your support staff as a whole. As I say, obviously if you're a trust, looking at different schools, and obviously we know, for example, some schools have inherited free schools, for example, and they weren't using these scales. So that type of exercise is probably important in obviously in the next six months, especially to audit where you are in relation to current staff. Again, thinking about the policies is probably too early. We were hoping we'd be able to tell you more at this stage, but thinking about how the SSSNB could impact your pay policy in particular. Again, that auditing piece, looking at gaps in pay, grading, and terms and conditions. So just a reminder, the SSSNB pay is obviously the headline topic and what's getting the attention, but it is about other terms and conditions as well. So it will include holiday, we think, it will include progression routes. So all of this is going to be mapped out by the SSSNB. And again, I'd love to say to you, this is what to do now, but we're in this bit of, this period where we can't quite fully direct you on that. But I think that overall review at this stage is a really, really good idea. And we've just asked the question to ourselves about pay protection. So if somebody does go down, will they be protected? Again, I wish we could give you an answer, but it's hopefully a yes. And there may be local terms that mean you have to do that at the moment, but obviously it's different to teaching where that's built into the obviously to the collective agreement. So again, these are all things that we might be thinking about now, but I think that exercise, looking at support staff as a whole, looking at consistency, whether it's one school or whether it's across trusts, doing this type of exercise now, and then thinking about how that impacts on your policies is probably good practice at this stage. Contracts, James could talk about contracts all day, but I think again it's just another part of the order, I think, at the moment, to see where you are now, try to anticipate changes that will be coming on, or looking at anything that you think might, which will change or will need immediate change when the bill comes in.
I was just going to say on the contract point, I was giving some thought to this, and the one thing I would say is keep in mind that the SSSNB is being introduced as part of the unions as well, so it might be that we're able to get sort of collective agreement to those changes of the contract. So I don't anticipate every sort of school in the country is going to have to do sort of go through a process of changing everyone's contract. My guess is it's going to be a much more streamlined process, but again we'll wait and see. But I can't imagine everyone's going to have to go through a full restructuring process to change everyone's terms and conditions as a result.
Can I ask a question at this point? Because theoretically, academy trusts are entitled to do what they want. Are they fundamentally saying that this piece of legislation, that freedom has been removed?
I think that's the way it's going, because you can see the same with the teachers' paying conditions as well. I think fundamentally that's what it seems to be going. Now, I think one of the things that I didn't talk about as well was probably worth saying as well. I think part of the difficulty for me is particularly some of the larger multi-academy trusts is this works quite well with some standard roles, but like if I was to use the example of like a traditional school business manager, I've never seen a job in my life that has a greater degree of variety than what some people do versus others. And so trying to actually sort of like try and get that into one thing is going to be difficult. Some larger trusts, for instance, might have in-house lawyers. Like that's not going to be that everyone has, but some people probably do have in-house lawyers. Where are they going to fit on the scale? How are they going to take into market effects? Like if you're not based in London, but let's say if you're based in Manchester, for instance, you might have real struggle trying to get social media people, for instance, those sorts of marketing people, those sorts of roles. And how that's going to be dealt with, we don't yet know. But fundamentally, to answer your question, I think there is an element definitely of a lot of those freedoms are being eroded. And I think this isn't the only piece of legislation where that seems to be the case.
And I think that's the who point, because version 1 of this read as if CEOs were included in the triple SNB, and they use the term around central staff.
Yeah.
And we actually wrote to the FA at the time to actually ask for the regulation, because version 1 looked like anybody on the executive of a trust was included in the triple SNB, and that's now changed in the most recent guidance. But again,
but if you go back to that original definition, if the CEO doesn't teach, they should only be in LGPS, and they're a member of support staff, not a member of teaching staff.
yeah.
But LGPS and TPS for CEOs is a whole other kind of verbs. I can talk about that all day as well if you want to.
Yeah. I think there'll be a formal recognition of executive staff, which I think maybe culturally is in place at the moment. But anyone who's covered by the executive pay guidance for schools may well be exempt for this. But again, we don't know what we don't know in a way. But I think we can be quite clear that CEOs won't be included, but other HR staff, marketing staff, finance staff, we're still not 100% sure on the detail at this stage, I'm afraid. And obviously, next on the slide, we're discussing with stakeholders. So I think, again, you could probably tell them next week you attended a session and we've learned a little bit about this, but I think engaging with governors and trustees is going to be really important, that they're aware that, obviously, from you as people leaders and school business leaders, that this is coming. There has been, I don't know if anybody participated in the consultation before the summer, which closed in July, so there was an opportunity to consult on these changes, and you as schools and as trusts to give your thoughts on the proposed changes. That's happened, and that's what we don't have the outcome of sat here today, which we thought we would. So that's coming, again, not entirely sure when, but I do think once version 2 comes out, there'll still be further chance to consult. So there's things, things like this and trade union changes and family rights that are all open to consultation at the moment, and you can all get involved in as employers, obviously with the other 2 issues, but as schools in relation to the triple SNB. So I think, again, more will come, but we know change is coming, and obviously how that happens. I also think this is one of them on the ground where the trade unions might know more than we do at the moment. So I think sometimes if you're having meetings with trade unions anyway, if you're having your JCNC meetings, you might just want to ask them if they've heard anything on the ground in relation to any updates or anything coming, because I think they're in the room a little bit more in respect to some of these changes as well.
I was just going to say, Craig, one of the things to note as well is the consultation. The next consultation was supposed to be released autumn of this year. I think we're technically still in autumn. I can't quite think what I don't think there's long left. I think it might be a couple of days, but yeah, it's certainly the case. It's supposed to be autumn, so it might come out this week. You never know. Like, but we'll wait and see.
My daughter has still excellent winter starts yesterday, actually.
Oh, really?
The 21st of December, which was a bit, I thought it was sooner, but maybe right. So they got to the 21st of December. Well, we all know what they'll do. They'll do it on the 18th of Friday, 18th of December. Everything will come out just as the one's going up on the day. So as I said, in terms of change, obviously there's pay and budget impact again. I wish we could say a bit more about this, but we do know national pay scales are coming. We do know that there will be pay progression frameworks that aren't in place at the moment, which you'll have to adapt to. And again, pay protection arrangements. Again, sorry, I wish we could say more, but I think when announcements are made, this is going to be a bit of a multi-year budget planning, because it's not going to come in next year. It's going to be 2 or 3 years away. And obviously in between that as well, we'll have the usual NJC pay awards, hopefully, in terms of increases to those scales. So unfortunately with support staff, that the next 2 or 3 years and budget planning are going to be rather difficult. They are difficult now, but maybe more difficult. But again, one of the hopes with the triple SNB is that some of the things that you've faced in the last few years in relation to not knowing about pay awards, which were meant to be happening in April, and finding about them in July, September, October. One of the ideas behind this is that more certainty, hopefully. So this should, in the same way, it's always perfect, the same way that obviously the teachers recognition body tell us what's coming. This is the hope that having something dedicated for schools will hopefully improve that and assist with budgeting. But obviously, I can't make any promises in relation to anything budget or people related at the moment. Obviously, the NJC is obviously well beyond schools and applies to local authorities, so there is hope that having a more dedicated function for schools will benefit you as business leaders. Again, engaging, keeping up to date, I think is really important. As I say, we will be doing things on notifications, the DFE, there is stakeholder communications and trade unions. There's lots of there was obviously a huge amount of information that came out about the SSSNB. It's really slowed down since the summer, but when announcements are made, I think it's really important to keep up to speed. We've mentioned consultation. We will be telling you when consultations are available and how to get involved. Again, thinking about how to get your voice heard or giving your input as the people doing this every day is really, really important, I think, in relation to how the SSSNB is going to look and affect schools moving forward. And consultation as well, I think, so the kind of example you gave there, when you've got unique staffing models, it's not going to be a straight switch over, so there's consultations and making DFE and others aware of the challenges that you're facing into the consultation will hopefully hit home, because we know there's lots of trusts in particular who have those.
I mean, I have done that because we're quite generous with our support staff as well. We pay them the same pay, percentage pay rise as teachers get.
Okay.
So if I move them back to NJC, obviously they would be worse off, so the unions aren't really happy about that. So we're just stuck with these two different policies, really.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and we've kind of compared it to the sixth form college. I don't know if anybody has sixth form colleges in their trust. Their pay, although the sixth form college association is a membership body, they perform collective consultation on pay for all members of staff within sixth form colleges. So that's done centrally, and then whatever's agreed then applies to all the sixth form colleges. So this is a similar thing on a much larger scale, of course. So there's I say, feeding in and trying to get your voice heard amongst the hundreds is, but that's it. It's going to be difficult, and obviously engagement and informing people, but there's no choice in relation to this. So that's the unions locally shouldn't be kicking off about it in some senses, because it's their regional and national offices who've agreed what's coming in place. So I appreciate it doesn't make it easier when you're in the room with them and they're trying to say you need to do this, this and this. Your hands will be tied in many respects once this comes in 2 to 3 years. We've been thinking, so just on a similar theme, we asked you to put some slides in about how this is going to impact your people strategy. So I think most of this we've mentioned in relation to the next 6 to 12 months. Think about, obviously, tracking updates, think about signing a senior lead or somebody who's just on top of the SSSNB, so you know what's coming, because it will impact your people strategy. We've talked about auditing support staff roles and thinking about pay scales and contractual terms across the trust. And again, thinking about those variances that may be in place now to what's in the NJC, because we do know locally that there are variances in place depending on which borough or which council your school is in. And again, budget impact analysis, probably too soon, but we need the notification to really know where we're in relation to any budget impact analysis. We see phase 2, obviously, is about developing the transition framework. I think there'll be lots of guidance in relation to how we do this, but over time we'll be able to plan much better, put a roadmap in place. Think about the roles most likely to be affected as well. Again, once we get that guidance, we'll know more about that, but with teaching assistants, for example, you're going to have more teaching assistants than any other support staff role, I imagine, so think about how we'll engage and communicate. Again, trade unions are going to have a very, very central role in relation to these changes, so the consultation and forums with them will be a really good source of information. And then over time, SSSNB will impact your recruitment and retention strategy. So we'll will probably go without saying in many respects that how you pay support staff, but what that's doing is obviously levelling the field even more. So we might need to think more about our recruitment and retention strategies, how we differentiate through the non-benefit, how we think about the type of employer we are, how we're going to attract and retain and obviously develop support staff as well, might all be impacted because of this, obviously this external change which is being impacted on you as an employer. And then, as we've said already, over time, policies and contracts will change once it's implemented. We're thinking about how we communicate this. Again, it's obviously a national change, something that's been implemented, but you will have control about how you communicate it. Obviously, any change within schools is difficult, and giving people that understanding of why these changes are occurring and how that's happening is going to be really, really important, and that transparency. And there's a couple of things where there will be impact on your people strategy. The SSSNB is very much the information we've received so far is about developing support staff within the school sector. So, as well as the terms and conditions and the pay changes, there's going to be particular CPD and particular progression routes designed specifically for support staff. So, again, from a HR and people point of view, this sounds really positive. It's about the profession. It's about developing support staff. So there's going to be much more guidance and much more clarity about how you do that. So there's lots of positives within what will be a significant period of change, I think, when it does arrive. This is our shameless plug time. We are doing our very, very best, and James used the term, we're going to paddle now.
But I feel like paddle's the trendiest sport now, isn't it, than ping pong, but yeah.
Paddle might be better because there's 4 balls and everything's flying all over the place and we don't know what's going on. So there's some leaflets on your table there as well. I should say our colleague Amy has developed Employment Rights Hub, so we're doing our very best to stay ahead of obviously legislation changes, obviously this is part of it, but also giving you guidance in relation to how it's going to impact your people strategies, your policies, your recruitment as well. So if you do have chance, and it's going to be a constant, I think, for the next couple of years, we have a particular hub designed to try and stay ahead of everything that's changing in the world of employment, which is I'll be lucky, once in a generation change in relation to employment. So we're doing our very best to stay on top of everything. So that hub's updated on a daily basis, certainly a weekly basis at the moment. Yes, lots and lots of changes obviously outside of the SSSNB, but it's one part of lots of things that are happening at the moment. So we're doing our best to stay ahead of that for you. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So for instance, we tutored out catering staff, for instance, a long time ago. The staff that transfer over had the same terms and conditions, say that in equivalent pension scheme. Over the years, as those staff have left, new staff joined the company's pension scheme.
Yeah.
And then when they re-tutored at that later level. So are you saying that when this comes in, we have to put them all into the LGPS, or does that continue?
That's what it's looking like, yeah, because you are right. When the people who initially transfer over, it doesn't matter because they're going by TUPE. But that's what the proposal looks like. Now, what we're not certain of, does it have retrospective effect or does it only apply going forward? That's the one thing we don't know yet. I don't know how retrospective effect would work, but then you're going to have massive inconsistencies. So we'll wait and see. The only bit of good news I can give you is there is a proposal to much simplify. If anyone's had LGPS for contracts and had to go through the payment of admission agreements, they're talking about getting rid of admission agreements. So basically, as a trust, you're just seen as the employer for LGPS purposes. So that's about the one bit of good news that I can maybe give. Admission agreements may be a thing of the past and the future. So
does that mean admitted body status won't be required? So effectively,
It
we
won't.
will effectively
Yes.
underwrite the trust.
basically, the rights trust, which I think probably catering point doesn't matter. Cleaning is where we see all the issues. Cleaners seem to be the issue of admitted body status, and I think that's why they're reducing it, because for people who know, for the LGPS, you can, if they can't get admitted body status, they can put them under the legislation. It says you can put them in an alternative like pension scheme. That's but it doesn't exist. Basically, the product doesn't exist in the market, so it's pointless.
I kind of have 2 questions. One, there was suggestion in all of this and with the teachers' pay review that there was a piece of work to align the school business professional salary to a leadership salary within teaching scales. Is there any more news on that?
I don't know. The short answer is no, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I think there's obviously, I think the campaign goes through various channels such as ISBL, but in terms of what we're seeing in terms of statutory guidance or things coming, nothing at the moment. But that's a really grey area about the executive or the leadership post. And again, what I think is happening, obviously 20 years ago we had support staff and we had teaching staff and we had head teachers. And I think the DFE and others was really slow in terms of developing the executive pay. So I think there's quite a lot of different, lots of different models in relation to executive pay, who's on executive pay, because obviously with trusts of certain size, the top of NJC might not be enough to attract some of the leadership roles within trusts, which are traditionally more support-based roles. So again, it's a bit of wait and see, but version 1 did not look good, version 2 looks better because it looks like actually that the ability to.
Well, I was going to ask about pay scales and mapping them, because the reality is that minimum wage now, if you're a full-time employee, your minimum wage or salary is £25 a year, which is just throws all the differentials out.
Yeah.
And with the pay scales, and if they're going to start mapping the new ones against NJC, it's almost a pointless exercise.
It is, yeah, because the bottom,
So what do we
points Spanish sound.
What's the thought process on that? Do you know where we're at with that?
Again, no is a short answer, because obviously there's been an announcement about national minimum wage. I guess the people developing the SSSNB are pulling their hair out about, you'd hope for communication, but we know what's happened in the past where it's a bit of an afterthought of minimum wage scale, we need to lose 0.4, 0.5, 0.6 on our scale, because, and then what that does, I'm sure you've experienced, is it just closes the gap between roles that some lower paid roles are now being paid at the same level of roles where there were, obviously there was a good few points gap previously, because obviously you can't afford to then progress to teaching assistants and do the ladder. So again, you'd hope so, but sorry.
I suspect I know the answer, but is there, so for instance, as our trust, we were in the early stage of looking at combining them with the trust. We've got a different level of authority, whose support staff wages are generally a lot lower for the same, for equivalent roles, but at the same time we get a lot less funding, just to the local authority. So if we joined, I'm sure SSSNB will put them all on the same level. Is this tying with funding levels as well?
My belief would be that it will put everyone at the same level, would be my understanding, so yeah.
But they're not only the funding level as well, that's what I'm saying.
That's a very interesting question. It's one of those where we'll wait and see what happens with the funding, because that's what it always comes down to, isn't it? It's, yeah, as you probably always found in the past with the unfunded pay rises in the past, it's the funding is the devil in the detail, and I suspect we probably won't find out much about that until very shortly before it's due to be implemented.
We're keeping an eye on that point separately, because when you look at the finer detail of the employment rights bill, it looks at the intricate scheme, not just in relation to pay, but in relation to day one rights, for example, for SMEs, and give funding to SMEs to make the employment changes that are coming. So we've sent letters to the DFE and to a couple of our intermediaries in the charity sector as well, because we're saying, well, what about schools and what about charities? I've got a bad feeling, as with most things, they're going to say, well, schools already get public funding, they need to manage it within, but we're trying to build that case and campaign for schools to say, yes, they get funding, but actually that example there is a perfect example, which is going to cause hardship, and ultimately what we don't want to happen is that hardship to mean redundancy and other changes, which ironically will be much more difficult than the employment rights bill, but that's a different topic. So yeah, we're trying to keep an eye on that side of things as well. We campaign for schools to try and ensure the understanding. So we spoke to Isabel, we spoke to CST, we spoke to as I said, some of our charity intermediaries as well, to try and bang the drum. But anything again in the consultation, get it down in black and white, I think is the best we can do as well.
With the SSSNB, it just seems like it's already going on forever. What are sort of the unions saying about it? Because you hear them mention it, but there is nothing concrete. You don't know who's having what discussion. It just all seems sort of in limbo. Is there one that's better than another or more engaged, or is NAHT popping up because they say they're for business leaders, but then you don't get a voting side with NAHT? So what has the
research for this session. Unison have updates for a few months ago, so there's not all GMB are very active. NEU are actually saying quite a lot on it, because I think I feel like a lot of support staff members have maybe gone across to NEU as well. So again, they're kind of in a similar position to us where they're holding off on answering anything for a few months, but overall they're in favour. They think the consistency of approach for schools is the best thing that can happen. Obviously they'll be hoping for jumps in pay, and again they'll be campaigning for the things they want to achieve as well. But as we've said, they can campaign for this, but if the funding's not there, which is why I think the schools voice is as important to get that through.
And have they given any sort of idea of the timeline? Because there's obviously some in our presentation, but again, just all seems like a shot in the dark.
It is. The 27, 28 is the date, but like I said, when 27, 28 was introduced, I think we expected the Employment Rights Bill to be enforced by July this year. It's still not enforced, and we're probably not going to be enforced this side of Christmas. It wouldn't shock me. I've seen speculation that it might go to the next parliamentary session, which would be April, May, which means we're basically a full year behind where we are. And of course, if you go to April, May in that implementation, you're then probably coming up to a general election as well. So you're right, it is all up in the air. It's all up in the air at the minute. I think that's a fair comment to make.
We'd hope it would be April 27 if it is, but they might throw a curveball in.
It wouldn't shock me to be introduced like October 2027 to be implemented from September 2027. Wouldn't shock me, to be perfectly honest, but we'll wait and see. So don't have any questions. While we're just talking about that, one thing I just wanted to briefly talk about very, very quickly, because I know there'll be quite a lot of Academy Trusts in here, is just to make you all aware, you probably maybe have seen the changes to the Academy Trust Handbook around confidentiality clauses and settlement agreements. It's just something we wanted to talk about, and I think when I'm talking about stuff coming into retrospective effect, for those who aren't aware, there was a change made to the Academy Trust Handbook on the 22nd of October, despite the fact that the Academy Trust Handbook is effective from the 1st of September, so we'll leave that for a moment. That basically said any settlement agreements contain the confidentiality clause on novel, contentious or repercussive and require DFE approval. So therefore, any time you want to include a confidentiality clause in a settlement agreement, and that also includes non-derogatory comments clauses, you're going to need DFE approval. And in my experience, DFE approval, I've not done it for this matter, but for other matters, it takes months and months and months. So what I would say to you is, just as a sector, we need to get used to the idea of not having confidentiality clauses in settlement agreements. A lot of uncertainty. Again, we've written to the DFE asking quite a few questions to try and get some clarity, but as yet we don't have a response. But I just thought, as there's probably quite a few trusts in the room, I thought it was just worth mentioning that in case anyone wasn't aware, just to be aware that that's coming to force now.
You know, the breadth of confidentiality, is that, so we're talking non-disclosure agreements, we're talking poaching, we're talking confidentiality, is it as broad as it is long?
So it's a really interesting question, because there's no definition of what confidentiality is in any document.
Brilliant.
So exactly. One of the points I've raised, that we've raised with the DFE, is if confidentiality is basically affects the ability of one person to say what they want about the other, does that mean a reference is a confidentiality clause? Because I think you could easily argue from a trust perspective it's a reference. The other thing to keep in mind is this works both ways. So even if an employee wants a confidentiality clause, you'd still need approval. My guess would be if it's driven by the employee, you'd probably get approval. But how long that approval takes is another question. But yeah, we've asked the question because if it's not novel, because everyone's been doing it for a while, it's not repercussive, because everyone's been doing it for a while, so it must be contentious. But if it's contentious, does that mean confidentiality clauses anywhere? Like, they're probably in your contract of employment, for instance. Does that mean we've got to remove lots of unanswered questions? So we're going to wait and see. I think this will be something we're going to be talking about lots about over the next year. I think we're at the early stages.
Yeah, I think we just close and say we really, really appreciate attending the session. This time next year we might do it again because we'll know more potentially and we know what's coming. So yeah, we'll see you this time next year for the same session on the same topic. But really appreciate it. If you keep an eye on the hub or want to chat at us, yeah, please do let us know. We're here for the next 2 days. Thank you.